G'day mates, it's be.busta here, and I hope you guys are all doing really well. As you all obviously know, Halloween is coming up soon, and as a little something special, I'm hoping to do a subscribers only stories for a little something different for you all. And I'm also hoping to make the video a little bit longer than normal. So if you have any stories you would like to share with the Hive, particularly if they're related to Halloween, I would love for you to send them through to me. If you do have a story to send through, please send it to my email in the description below. Also guys, I just want to say a huge thanks again for all the support and love you guys throw my way. Be sure to drop a like and leave a comment if you enjoy the video, and without further ado, let's begin.
Number 9.
Back when life was simpler, but bad things still happened, like John Bennett Ramsey being murdered, and at this point in time, Elizabeth Smart was just taken out of her home. I myself had a very scared notion about being in my room alone. I had slept with my parents from the time I was born until now, which at this time I was about 12. I finally decided that I needed to sleep on my own, though again, very freaked out about being kidnapped. I was so terrified about things that I had seen that I didn't even undress in my room. This was the first night that I actually decided to do this. My room was situated on the first floor, with the living room wall between me and my parents' room. I had bunk beds, top bunk for my crap, bottom for me to sleep in, so because of the shadow that cast from the top bunk, I could see out the window better than if there was no bunk. I had left the window and the shade open and up to let the cool night air in. I think my mum was in the bathroom, which saw me getting dressed in my room. Otherwise, this may never have happened, or worse. So I go and take off my shirt, and that's when I hear branches cracking. I immediately look out the window, and I see a black silhouette of a face. I can't see any features. This face is just looking at me, and I'm looking back. I scream, bloody murder. My dad rushes in, but before he can see anything else, this man or being slowly turns to the left and walks, not run, walks away. My dad tries to tell me I'm making it up, everything is fine. He closes the window and pulls the shade down and goes about the rest of the night. In the morning, I make my own investigations. I go out to where this thing was, look up at the window and guesstimate that he must have been over 6 feet tall to look into my room like that. My dad is only 5'11" and can't look into the room at all. I tell my dad this, but he shrugs it off. Fast forward about 13 years later, I'm sitting in my dad's apartment with my boyfriend talking about this ordeal. My dad adds to the story. "Yeah, Katie, I remember that night. I ran out the door to see if I could see anything. I remember seeing a man walking up the street, dressed in all black. I slept on the couch with a knife, just in case he came back. The dude was actually really tall, and when I yelled at him, he just kept walking. You're fine and alive. Don't worry about it anymore." So yeah, Dad in his infinite wisdom kept that from me.
Number 8.
At the end of last year, I was in my room getting ready to hang out with my girlfriend. During this time, my mum, sister, and brother-in-law were all about to go shopping at the mall together for Christmas presents. As I was getting dressed, I heard my mum call out to me while she was stepping out the door. About 10 minutes after they left, I was in the hallway getting a towel to dry my face off. As I stepped away from the door and was about to shut it, I froze. From the back door, I heard my mum call out my name as if she wanted me to come to her. My dog was lying on the couch right across the room from me when this happened. She jumped to her feet, but didn't move. And usually, when my dog hears someone coming home, they begin barking and approach whoever just walked through the door. But the thing is, no one walked through the door. In fact, my mum wasn't even home. My dog just sat there, staring at me, then into the next room around the corner from the hole that I was frozen in. Honestly, I don't know what scares me more. The fact that I can't explain what I heard, or that my dog heard it too.
Number 7.
So this occurred roughly about 2 years ago, around August 2014. My husband, whose nickname is Skeeter, and I had just moved down to a small town in Nevada from the bustling city of Los Angeles, California. For safety and practicality purposes, I will not disclose the exact location of our residence, but I will say that this area's population is definitely below 900 people. We'd moved just shortly after the birth of our son, having decided that the small town life was for us as a young couple and young parents. Jobs are easier to come by, the pace is slower, expenses are reduced, and it would be the perfect place to raise our family. Surprisingly, the only concern I had about the place was the fact that everything was so spaced out, with the nearest house being a little over a mile away. In case of an emergency, my neighbours could be of little to no assistance. Skeeter, however, had no qualms about this, as he was a rather private person, and the idea of slight seclusion didn't particularly bother him. So, in we moved on a hot summer day. Now, in this incident, we had only been in the town for maybe 2 weeks and we were still settling in. It was a warm Friday night, somewhere around 11 o'clock, and my husband was in town working security at the bank. Our son Julius was only 3 weeks old and very colicky, and this night he was just inconsolable. No matter what I did, he wailed his little lungs out. I was stumped for what to do, so I decided to go for a walk with him, as car rides always seemed to soothe him. I would have driven the baby around in the car, but Skeeter drove himself to work that night. I should mention that we have 2 dogs, a 2-year-old German Shepherd named Titus, and our 4-year-old Maltese, Dasher. I figured that they would need a walk before I managed to calm Julius down, and we all turned in for the night. One thing about Dasher and Titus is that they are overprotective of me and the baby, and will raise the alarm at the smallest of threats. It made me feel safe walking alone outside in the pitch dark with a newborn, miles away from any other human beings and the security of my husband. So I threw on their leashes and strapped the bawling Julius to my chest, heading out the back door and making sure my keys and phone were in my pocket. There's a winding, unpaved trail that starts a few feet to the left of our back porch and leads into a thatch of tall trees. It's about a 10-minute walk down, but I wasn't afraid due to the fact that I'd grown up taking hikes in the Topanga Canyon and going on camping trips in Big Bear as a child. The walking seemed to do the trick, as within a few minutes the baby quieted down and my dogs finally relaxed. They were always tense when Julius was fussing. I was just about to pass the wild shrubbery and tall grass that you see right before you get to the firs, when I felt resistance on the other end of the leads. I glanced back and Dasher and Titus were paused and looking off to the right of the path at full attention. As a mother and a female, this of course made me very paranoid, and I gently tried to coax them to keep walking. Both took a few steps, but Dasher stopped again, and I could see her fur standing on end. Titus began to growl, which freaked me out because he was the more docile of the two, and I'd rarely ever heard him growl. This time, I hissed my command, and they hesitantly moved forward. At this point, I was beyond petrified, as I had no idea what the hell was out there and causing my dogs to go crazy. Even if I did, what the hell could I do with a baby, 2 dogs, and no protection? I decided to turn around and go back home, forget this whole situation. Right? Wrong. We had been heading southwest, back in the opposite direction that we had come from for about 2 minutes, when a figure stepped onto the weathered path. Literally, there are no words to describe the icy, potent fear running through my veins at the small figure just a few feet in front of me. I'm about 5'2", give or take, and this person, or whatever the hell it was, is several inches shorter than me, maybe about the height of an average 10-year-old. The creepiest fucking part though is that this thing had on a pig mask with the mouth crudely carved into a crooked smile and smears of dark liquid all over the face. I don't think it was blood, but I digress. We're just standing there, staring at each other for what must have been about 30 seconds when all of a sudden Dasher and Titus launched themselves at Pigman, snarling and snapping at him aggressively. It was almost rabid and it should have scared a normal person, but it didn't scare him. Pigman, what I'll be calling him from now on, looks down at my dogs in an almost curious fashion, and I'm thanking God that the leashes are keeping them from seriously wounding this individual. I'm also trying to think of how to get myself out of this situation without freaking out. To my surprise and happiness, the baby hadn't gotten scared and started crying from all of the ruckus and was just cooing softly. Pigman finally seemed to notice my baby on my chest, and I guess it had some type of morals. It made a weird sort of wailing sound and darted back the way it had come, and I could hear it disturbing the grass as it walked further into the wild greenery. I didn't wait to see nothing else from or about it and noped the fuck out of there, hauling ass all the way home. It's true what they say about adrenaline, it makes you do some amazing things. Here I am, still recovering from childbirth with a baby strapped to my chest and 2 dogs, and I'm full on sprinting in the almost pitch darkness. I'm surprised that I didn't trip or hurt myself. The usual 10-minute walk only took about 3, and when I got home, I double locked the doors, closed all the windows and curtains, and waited for my husband to get home. Titus and Dasher are troopers, my little saviors, and I thank God for them protecting my family. I would have never have known that that thing was there until it was too late had it not been for them, and I don't know how things would have turned out had I not brought them along. They got extra love and treats for months after that, and to this day, I never go outside alone at night. I don't know who or what the hell that pigmask fucker was, but I'm just glad that I got my baby, my dogs, and myself away from it.
Number 6.
This isn't my story, but my mother's. This took place before I was born. While I have many a story myself, her experience leaves a sour taste in my mouth. My first home was in a trailer park where this story takes place. When you would pull into the park, there would be the post office to your right. There was also a small parking lot so you could hop out and get your mail. One night, my mum was driving home from a friend's house at about 1 a.m. I wasn't born at the time, so she was more carefree. My mum decided that she would stop and get to the mail since it was on the way. My mum pulled into the parking lot behind a stopped car. She ran to get the mail and then ran back to the car. Once my mum was situated and ready to go, she noticed that the car in front of her was still sitting there. My mum didn't think much of this. Maybe the guy was reading his mail in his car. Anyway, my mum waited for about 5 minutes before she finally decided to drive around him. She was almost in front of him when he laid his hand on the horn, effectively scaring the shit out of my mum. The guy stuck his hand out the window to give my mum the finger. My mum is quick to anger, but this time she decided to ignore the man and continue on. But as my mum pulled out of the parking lot, she heard him start his car. He followed her, practically touching her fender the whole way back to our trailer. The whole time, he slammed on the horn and was screaming from his car. By this point, my mum was freaking out. She regrets it now, but at the time, all she could think of was going home. So, she did. My mum pulled into our driveway and ran into the trailer. The man got out of his car and stood in our lawn, still screaming about how much of a bitch my mum was. My mum immediately woke up my dad. Now, my dad is a huge guy, definitely not someone you want to fuck with, and the second my dad stepped out of the house, the man was gone. Sadly though, that didn't last for long. My dad always worked the second shift, approximately 2 p.m. to about 1 a.m., though he wouldn't get home until at least 4 a.m. from working overtime. My mum is unable to work due to her non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, so she would be alone the entire time, besides our dog Mikey, who isn't much help being a small dog. Anyway, the man didn't stop it that night. He kept coming back, driving past our house and stopping across the street. My mum started to find letters on our porch. She won't tell me what's written on them, so I can only assume the worst. This continued for weeks until she finally called the police. The man was warned and went away for a few months. My mum was so relieved in that time that she started to lose that paranoia and in turn, her caution. It was a chilly November here in the north when she went to her friend's house for a couple of drinks. She intended to stay the night and had even brought the dog with her so he wouldn't be alone. Her friend lived out in the country, so when it snowed hard, it was useless to try and leave. Being almost winter, my mum was snowed in for a few days at her friend's house, but my mum wished that she had never gone back to our trailer. When my mum opened the door, she realised that it hadn't been locked. Our door was pretty easy to push open with enough force back then, so she wasn't alarmed. It was when our second door was open that she panicked. My mum stepped inside just to stop in her tracks. The place was trashed. Nothing looked to be missing, but the couch was flipped over and the coffee table's glass surface cracked. The things that struck fear into my mother's heart, though, were the things that the intruder had left there. Pictures, crude drawings of terrible scenes. When I asked my mum to describe what she had seen, she once again refused to be specific. She just said that there were a lot of blood in the images. My mother immediately called the police, but they never found the guy. A couple of years later, she had me, and whenever my mum thinks she sees the man's car, or anyone looking remotely like that, she shoos me into the house and locks all of our doors.
Number 5.
So occasionally my family and I go camping. One weekend, we decided to go camping about 2 hours away from our home. About 20 miles outside of our campsite, I saw a young woman with red hair walking beside the road. I'm not sure if she was hitchhiking or just walking, but she seemed like she was crying. I would have stopped, but my kids were in the car and, well, stranger danger and all. My husband and I decided to set up camp, and he would then go back and see if he could help her. This campsite was pretty and surrounded a circular lake, about medium size. The great thing was that it was a Thursday and hardly any campsites were taken. A car pulled up right before dusk, directly across from us at the other side of the lake. A woman with red hair and a dark-haired man got out. As my husband was going to check on the red-haired girl walking down the road, she walked up to our campsite with the dark-haired man. I'll call him Bob. She and Bob seemed in love. They were kissing on each other and she didn't seem to be crying anymore. But I was curious about her walking down the road, so I began to ask her questions. I asked her why she was walking, and she proceeded to tell me that she had gotten into a fight and she just needed some space, but that he must love her because he came back looking for her. Meanwhile, my husband and the man talked fishing. The man said he was going to do some catfishing at night and that he hoped he wouldn't keep us up with the noise. He said his girlfriend always got excited when she caught something. The man asked some questions about us and the kids, our names, and even asked to see inside of our Charger. My husband was loving the attention, but I wanted to sleep. I kinda gave the hint and they walked away to talk to the only other campers there. Sometime that night, around 2 a.m, I heard a woman scream. I nudged my husband awake and he was like, "Oh, that guy said his girlfriend gets excited while fishing and he was sure that it was fine." Well, I got out of my tent to check and I couldn't see anyone near the docks, but I also didn't see anyone walking around. It was just that one scream and I thought that maybe they were excited about having some private time. At some point in the middle of the night, I heard some weird noises, saw a flashlight outside of my tent, and then a splash, but it's camping so I shrugged it off. Well, at daybreak, I heard more screaming and I heard police sirens. I rushed out of our tent and I'll never forget what I saw. Taped to my car was a note with all of our names on it, including my kids' names and the word. I didn't understand at first and I looked around. I noticed that the redhead and Bob were gone and the only other campers were over near the dock with the police. Next thing I know, they're pulling the body of the redhead out of the water. We were questioned and we answered the best that we could, but she was murdered. They said her throat was slit and then she was thrown into the water sometime later. What's even worse is that in my files, I have a picture of the side of the man's face and his car. I had lined the kids up on the side of the lake for a family picture, and when you zoom in, you can see them on the other side of the lake.
Number 4.
I've only told this to a few people outside of my family, and I only recently started talking about it. I wish I'd told someone sooner, as I discovered a co-worker encountered these men as well. I work downtown, standard 8 to 5 hours. Once in a while, I work overtime, but not often, and not on the day that this happened. It was just a couple of minutes after 5 p.m. when I left work. It's just a few blocks from my office building to the train station. There are a few bars and back alleys along the walk, but the worst I've ever dealt with along there are homeless folks who get a little bit aggressive asking for cash. But honestly, they don't bother me much. The train ride from the station downtown to the station where I parked my car is about 40 minutes. If I'm lucky, I manage to get a seat and don't have to stand for the whole ride. On that day, I was lucky, more or less. I got a seat next to a window which left the seat next to me open. At the next stop, 3 men got on. One of them sat next to me and the other sat on the seats across from me, so they were facing me. I was listening to music on my iPad, so I couldn't really hear them. I did notice, however, that the guy sitting next to me was trying to move closer to me on the seat. He would move close enough that his leg was touching mine, so I'd scoot away and he'd move closer again. Eventually, I was pressed right up against the window and had no doubt that he had more than a few inches of free space on his other side. I was wearing sunglasses and could surreptitiously glance at them. I'd noticed that they would occasionally say something and then all look at me. It was incredibly creepy and uncomfortable. I was nervous about getting off at my stop, but mine is the second to last on the train line. So when the train pulled into my station, I got off. The guy sitting next to me tried to grab my arm, but I was moving quickly and was able to get out. I was hoping that they wouldn't get off of the train there, but if they did, it was a busy station and they couldn't know where I parked. But they did. I guess it was their luck that they targeted me. I park in the furthest lot from the station because the parking there is free. It's about a 7-minute walk, which isn't usually too bad, but my lot tends to be pretty quiet and I was really worried about these guys following me. Just to add a bit of background information, I was fat. I work an office job and I was sitting all day and not working out. Add that to my strong sweet tooth and you've got a recipe for a bad body. I was about 30 pounds overweight and probably couldn't run more than 30 seconds. It's sad, considering I ran track and played hockey in high school. I still play hockey, but on a women's daytime league, and it's really not competitive. I'm the youngest on my team by about 20 years, but my mum is on the team and it's something fun to do together. I was crossing the bridge over the road from the station to the parking lots when I noticed the 3 guys less than 10 feet behind me. I wasn't carrying a knife, though I do own a legal size knife, nor any pepper spray because it's illegal in my Canadian city. I know a little bit about personal protection though. It was a required class for girls at the private high school I attended in my youth. So I put my car key and my house key between my fingers so if I needed to hit someone it would hurt them, at least a little. The guys followed me across the main lot. They didn't hide the fact that they were there, and the more nervous I was, the louder they laughed. I managed to get across the road between the lots before they got to the road. They had to wait for a couple of cars to pass before they could cross. I was almost halfway across the lot when they crossed the road. I started to run. I could hear their feet pounding pavement behind me. I used my clicker to unlock my car when I got close. I wrenched the door open, so glad that there was no one parked next to me. I had barely closed my door and slammed the lock when the guys reached my car. They were banging on my windows and yelling, jeering. I'd never been so afraid in my life. I was worried that they would break the windows and get in. There was a guy at the back banging on the back of my hatchback, so I couldn't reverse out of my spot without running him over. I should have, but I was afraid and not thinking. I was screaming, but no one was around to hear me. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew that it wasn't anything good. I wished I had the screamer my mum had given me for protection, but it needed a new battery, so I didn't bring it with me. But that thought, the one about the screamer, made me realize that I had something even better. When you're being assaulted, you're not supposed to scream for help. No one wants to help. You scream fire because everyone wants to watch the blaze. So, I turned my car alarm on. It was incredibly loud in my car. So loud that I thought I would go deaf, but it had the reaction I wanted. The guys started backing off. I saw people walking into the lot, looking in the direction of my car. People could see what was going on. The guys took off, back towards the train station. I drove home, crying. The very next night, I started working out. I have worked out almost every day since then. If those cars hadn't have been in the road at that time, if I'd just run a little slower, if I'd been too slow clicking the lock, it all could have ended so much differently. I've lost 20 pounds since then and have gained a great deal of muscle. I've also quit my job. I've had anxiety issues for years, and this encounter made it so much worse. I never want to feel that powerless again.
Number 3.
I first moved out of my parents' house in 2008. I was 20, I had a 2-year-old daughter, And gosh darn it, I wanted to assert my independence and prove that I wasn't living with my parents because I couldn't live on my own. Overall, it was a relatively dumb idea. I moved to a cool part of town, next to campus, next to one of our art districts, but in a really beautiful neighborhood I always wanted to live in. But it was 15 minutes away from the suburb that my parents lived in, and since I worked nights, I'd spend way too much time driving back and forth so my mum could babysit on the nights I worked. Despite the inconvenience, the neighborhood didn't disappoint. I was in a small apartment building right in the middle of beautiful Victorian houses. Houses that sell for upwards of over $1 million. Lovely neighbours, quiet area, no problems with anyone ever. It felt safe. There was a neighbourhood watching everything. I think there was only one incident of car break-ins in my 2 years there. And even then, they just hit cars that were unlocked. No smashed windows or damaged property. This story takes place right around the end of my second year there. 2 years of nothing remarkable other than the aforementioned car break-ins. Around May of 2010, I was outside cleaning the glass on the door and the windows, and decobwebbing the cheap black iron patio furniture I got at Target. The windows are tall and I'm short, so in order for me to clean the upper portions of the window, I had to stand on one of the chairs and reach. And that's when I noticed something. Lip prints. Well, just one set of lips. On the window. Pretty high up too. I couldn't have reached them if I wasn't on the chair. At the time, I was mostly annoyed, thinking maybe a neighbour had had friends over and one of his drunk friends kissed my window, because who else would ever be near my window? After that, I always made a point to see if the lips showed up again. They didn't, so it confirmed my drunk neighbour theory in my mind. Now, this is where everyone groans and rolls their eyes. Trust me, I know. I was young and dumb, but even that's not an excuse. Because of where I lived, neighbourhood-wise, and within the building, there was plenty of nights I'd leave the blinds open. And not only that, but the way the apartment was set up was like an L shape. There was the living room, kitchen, and bedroom all in a straight line back, and then the bathroom off to the side of my bedroom. My daughter's bed was more towards the inside of the bedroom, and mine was at the end of the straight line back. I liked the way the light would come through the trees in the morning. It was a really beautiful sight, and I liked waking up to it. I know, it was a dumb choice, and here's another thing that makes me want to curl up and die. Many nights, my daughter, who at this point in the story was 4 years old, would sleep in my bed, until she didn't, which was probably around the 4th of July if I remember correctly. She attributed this to, "The tall man watches me sleep, I don't like it." But in my defense, this kid was known for saying some really creepy shit. One time, she told me a ghost of a baby pig named Baby Pig Ghost would talk to her, and he was sad because people tore him apart, and she was sad because the other ghost pigs wanted to hurt me. So her saying something like that was super creepy, but I didn't think there was literally a tall man watching us sleep. But to appease her, and because I was thoroughly creeped out by what she said, I'd leave the blinds down at night. Most nights, I was up until 3 or 4 because of my work schedule. I figured that she was just being weird again, but that imagery sticks with you, I guess. So, on to the night that put me in therapy and turned me into the most paranoid person you could ever meet. It was early August. I was asleep in my bed. I went down pretty early. My bedroom door was open like it always was. I was asleep, facing the living room. The blinds were down and closed like they had been for a month, but the string was wonky, so one portion of the blinds always had about an inch or two space from the windowsill. All the lights inside were off, but the patio light was on, outside. I randomly woke up and looked down at my phone to see what time it was. Just a few minutes after 3. I was annoyed, thinking there's no way I'm going to fall back to sleep now. And that's when I saw it. Outside of the window, I saw the silhouette of a tall person through the blinds. He was standing completely still. He was standing so still for so long that I started to think I was crazy. I thought I was seeing things. And that's when he sat in one of the chairs outside. I was completely frozen in sheer terror. I couldn't move a muscle. Texting or calling for help seemed out of the question. I was afraid that he'd see the light from my phone or hear me. But then again, he sat there for so long that I convinced myself I just saw a shadow and that there was nothing there. And then, Again, he moved. He stood back up and turned around. He stepped closer to my window and paused. He got right up to the window and paused again. That's when he leaned over and was looking through the 2 inches of space between the windowsill and the bottom of the blinds. He stood there for longer than what seemed feasibly possible in that bent-over position, and his head didn't move. He just stood there looking while I kept my eyes mostly shut. I thought if there was any way he could possibly see me with my eyes open looking at him, it'd make him snap and he'd bust in. Eventually, he stood back up and walked out of view. Then, I heard the screen door creak open. I can only assume that he tried the doorknob, but thankfully, I wasn't so much of a dumb shit that I left my door unlocked. Then I heard the door shut again, and after that, there was nothing. After I heard the door shut, I didn't see him come back to the window. I checked my phone. It was 11:48 a.m. I quietly slid out of bed and crawled toward the bathroom and threw up. I waited until the sun came up before I called the cops. I can't explain why I was so afraid to move or make noise until then, but I was paralyzed with fear in the bathroom until then. 2 officers showed up and I stepped outside to talk to them, and it came as little surprise to see that the lip prints were on the window again, roughly in the same spot. The police took their photos and the report was filed. I never slept there again. With the police report, I was able to cancel the lease renewal I had signed, and I moved back in with my parents.
Number 2.
This story is technically my mum's, but it somewhat affected my siblings and me as well. My mum grew up in South Florida, and this started during the early 70s. She was a senior in high school, and she met a guy at a wedding. He was the drummer in the wedding band, a few years older than her, and therefore he was the cool, mysterious guy that many girls her age dreamed of. They immediately hit it off, and he commented on her saddle shoes she was wearing at the time. She gave him her home phone number, and I believe they maybe went on 1 or 2 dates and everything seemed totally fine. He would regularly call the house and she would sit on the kitchen floor and talk to him. One night, their phone conversation took a weird turn. He started asking her things like,
"Have you ever thought about killing yourself?
and
Do you ever think about murdering people?"
obviously, she was shocked at this and got very uncomfortable and completely stopped talking to him. This is the last she heard from him, or so she thought. It was 2012 and I just graduated from college. I was hanging out in my college town, finishing out my lease and work and figuring out my next move. My mum calls me and says something weird has been going on. She tells me she's received a letter from this man she knew in high school. At the time, I had no idea about this guy, as she had never mentioned him at all to me, my siblings, or my dad. She explains to me who this man is and how she knew him, but hadn't spoken to him since that one uncomfortable phone call. The letter said something like, "I see you're really happy and married with kids, etc." But he goes on to mention each of us by name. He also mentions my dad's name and where he works. My parents met in college in another state. They quickly married, graduated college and moved yet to another state, and then another state once my 2 sisters were born. She had no idea how he knew her new married name and address. She has never been on social media, and once she had all of us kids, had stopped working. If you were to Google her name, you wouldn't find a thing. She then recalls getting a phone call from the Alumni Association at her college, telling her that a man had been calling on and off for months, trying to get her contact information, but they weren't allowed to give out that information. She then tells me his name, and I remember having a Facebook friend request and a Twitter follow request from this man. My siblings all had them as well. My mum, having no social media, like I mentioned, asked me to see if I could dig around his social media accounts and see what I could find. I find a music MySpace and a Reverb Nation page of some really terrible music he had recorded and uploaded. One of the songs was called Victoria, which is her name. All of the other songs had seemingly normal titles like Summer's Day, etc. I tell my mum this and she freaks out. I send her the link and it's hard to make out the lyrics because the quality is so bad. But he mentions her saddle shoes, her beauty, etc. They literally hung out twice, 40 years ago, and these were songs that had been recorded pretty recently. I dig a little deeper and find out that he has made a website dedicated to freeing Amanda Knox, the woman accused of murdering her roommate in Italy. This was super alarming at the time, but I've since not put too much weight on that since her innocence is actually very possible. But it's still really strange. My dad didn't seem fazed by any of this, but my mum was freaked out and wouldn't stay home alone since this man knows their address. She ends up telling all of this to a family friend who is a private investigator, and he decides to do some digging on this guy. First of all, he's changed his last name. Secondly, he's moved to about 5 different states in the last 20 years under different aliases and working completely different jobs. There wasn't much that could be done since he never actually threatened my mum, and he didn't have a record. He still pops up every now and then with friend requests to my siblings and me, but other than that, no one knows what his deal is. The fact that he's moved around quite a lot and changed his name is definitely a red flag. I personally think that this dude is a serial killer, and if he's not, then he's just a sad, lonely, mentally unstable man, and I hope that he gets the help that he needs.
Number 1.
A little backstory. I'm a 32-year-old male, above 6 foot and 180 pounds. I'm recently going through a divorce and my wife moved out of our house. I put our house up for sale and I moved out into my own apartment as well. Not too long ago, I was physically assaulted by someone who was hired by my soon-to-be ex-wife, so I'm a little under the weather. I have 38 stitches, a concussion, and just got out of hospital, so I'm in no shape for much of anything right now. I have not forwarded my mail or changed my address to my new apartment for safety reasons. I have my mail going to a P.O. box instead, just to be secure. This is an important part of the story. So I'm laying on my couch watching baseball. I'm flipping through the channels and my doorbell rings. It was almost 8 p.m. and I wasn't expecting any visitors, nor did any of my friends tell me that they were stopping by. I ignored the doorbell and just turned the TV down, even though the volume was already extremely low. 5 minutes later and the doorbell rings again. So I got up and tiptoed to the door because the floor creaks a little when you get close. I look out the peephole and see a seemingly innocent petite looking woman, 5'5", in her mid-20s, standing out there just waiting. I put the chain on and I open the door and she immediately greets me by saying my name. I don't recognize her, so I respond.
And you are?
She held up a pie and said, "I'm your neighbor, I live in C2, my name is Alicia." Just for reference, C2 was across the hall and one over, so I can see the door to that apartment. It's just diagonally to the right, across the hall. I look at the door, I look back at her and I hesitantly undo the chain. I take the pie and look down at it, and then I ask,
How do you know my name?
She let out a giggle and answered, "One of your pieces of mail accidentally wound up in my box." I made a skeptical face and there was a pause before I said,
I don't receive mail here.
She wiggled an envelope in front of my face that was just a personal letter addressed to me. Nothing professional like a bill or anything viable. There was no return address, it was just addressed to me with my name and new address. I took it, then I told her that I've never seen her there. I've met the guy who lives there, but I've never seen her. She giggled again, then said that she had just moved in and extended her hand to shake mine. I usually give a firm handshake because I don't believe in wussy handshakes, but this time I have to admit that I did a pretty wimpy shake. She gave me a huge grin, raised the tone of her voice a little, and said, "It's nice to meet you." And when I didn't respond, she lowered the tone of her voice and said, "Neighbor." She looked me up and down for a moment, and then looked me dead in the eye with a straight face. She waved, and then she went down the hall to the elevator instead of back to her supposed apartment. I threw the pie away and opened the letter. It's unsigned and none of it's really relevant to me. The only thing really accurate is my name and new address. Update. I no longer live in my apartment across the hall from C2. I moved out sneakily by selling my larger stuff on Craigslist to my friends, so they take it to my new house for me and hold it for me until I move, without her being suspicious of my move. They were all random friends, none of them the same, so she wouldn't start to get curious and follow one of them. She had started leaving notes on my truck. She started mingling with people at the places I go that aren't involved. What I mean by that is, she'd make friends with people who are not in my circle of friends to have an excuse to be invited or to show up to places I frequent. I stopped going to any of them and rarely went to public places. I finally broke down and gave a statement to the police, and I gave them all of the notes and the evidence. There was a restraining order placed, and she was notified of this by a third party. She continued to find ways to pop up though, and it began to seem like a game of cat and mouse. Finally, the night before I was officially out of my apartment, the front staff called me to alert me that she had entered the building with 2 men, and they seemed to be in a hurry. I asked which way they went. She said they went to the north elevators, the ones I used to avoid her previously. I ran out of my apartment and ran to the south elevators, got to the lobby and was able to get into the office behind the desk thanks to the clerk at the desk. The cops were notified and I stayed there waiting in the office. They were in the building for at least 20 minutes before the cops arrived. They found my apartment open, but no one inside. They couldn't locate them in the building, and they said that they didn't have the authority to knock door to door, but they didn't tell me why. They escorted me to my room to check to see if anything was missing, but it was pretty bare anyway. The only thing I had left was my clothes for the next day, and a drink, and some chips. Nothing was obviously taken, so I just grabbed my stuff and left the apartment. The cops didn't directly escort me outside to avoid causing direct attention to me, as I was wearing a hoodie. I had borrowed my friend's car to avoid being followed to my new place when I left, so again, they monitored from a distance. The police watched me pull out and leave from a distance and watched for any behavior to see if I was being followed. They stated that there had been no activity to follow me, as they waited about 15 minutes watching for any cars to follow. I really hope that's true and they didn't just miss anything. This was over the weekend and I sold my truck and bought a new truck, so I will no longer be associated with my old beloved truck. I have yet to return to my previous town, as I now live a couple of hours away. I have no idea if this is over or not, but my gut tells me it's not. I sure hope that my gut is wrong and I'm just still on edge. I can't do anything without looking over my shoulder.